So, back to ethical careers. So now imagine you're fresh out of school or college, or soon to be fresh out of school or college, and you want to change the world for the better. What do? How do you go about choosing a career? A lot of us already have some picture about what it means to have an ethical career, what it means to do good, and how the people who do good are. These are maybe people that don't actually like the word career, I certainly didn't, or that are not calculating because they just follow their heart and so look something like this, okay? Or maybe something like, there we go. And maybe you think that they do not look something like this. We also have some conventional wisdoms about how to choose an ethical career that complement these stories that we tell ourselves. Things like, oh, just do what's most important to you, or what you're really passionate about. Who of you have heard do what you're really passionate about and just thought, wow, if I had this one passion I wanted to do my entire life, I wouldn't need career advice? So yeah, there's also more wisdoms of the likes. There are many ways to do good, or maybe every contribution is equally valuable. So there are a lot of things that you can say about this kind of advice. For example, that it's not really helpful when you're out of school and thinking about what to do next because it's not very concrete. But most importantly, I think it's also wrong. If you want to have an impact with your life, your career is probably the most important lever that you have. We spend about 80,000 hours in our career, which makes it the single thing that we spend the most time on, except for probably sleeping, depending on your lifestyle. So, what's more is you only have 80,000 hours in your career, which also means that every hour that you spend on one thing is not getting spent on another thing. So I think it's really important that we take the time to systematically think about how we can achieve good and stop confining ourselves to this very narrow picture of what it means to have an impactful career. So here are 5 lessons for choosing an impactful career. Number 1, get to the bottom of what you value, because you can't really do good if you don't know what it means. So let me give you an example. If you just follow the advice of just do what's most important to you, what might happen is something like you've just, say, read something about breast cancer screening in your country. Or maybe you even know somebody who suffered of breast cancer and was diagnosed too late. So you decide this is what you want to spend the rest of your life on. Obviously, fighting breast cancer is incredibly important. But I want you to notice that the reason why you decided to settle on this problem, they are basically purely coincidental and historical. If you instead take the time to really systematically think about what it is that you value, this might open your eyes to new possibilities that might be better suited to what you really want to achieve. So if you think about breast cancer screening in your country, I want you to think about what it is that makes you care about this topic. Is there something about breast cancer in specific? Or do you really just care about diseases in general? Or maybe even broader than this. Maybe you just generally care about saving lives, or about enabling human flourishing, making people happier, or maybe you care more about freedom than happiness. Another question you can ask yourself is, why did you decide to focus on your own country? Is this because you think you have some special obligation towards people that are physically closer to you? Or do you maybe think that helping somebody that's in another faraway country is just as valuable? How do you feel about people that are not yet born? And how do you feel about beings that are not humans, but might also feel suffering or joy? So I have to admit, all these questions seem not very concrete and very philosophical. And I also have to admit that I do study philosophy. But I think these questions actually really matter. Because depending on what's important to you, different projects will have different levels of promisingness to you. Which brings me to my second lesson, which is some areas of doing good are a lot more impactful than others. So let's go from making a difference to making the biggest difference. So yeah, some projects are just able to achieve a lot more with the resources that you invest into them. And sometimes when you invest a lot of resources into something, you don't get a lot out of it. In fact, David Anderson of the Coalition for Evidence-Based Policy said about his own research on US interventions that of the social programs rigorously evaluated. Most, perhaps 75% or more, including those that are expert-backed or evaluated by less rigorous studies, have small or no effects, and some of them even negative effects. 75%. This is not just a number. Behind all of these programs are probably a lot of people who spend a lot of their time, hard work, energy, with genuine intentions of doing good, just so that there are basically no results and the real problems go unsolved. So I think it's really important that we take a moment and think about what we can do to decrease the chances that this happens to us. And possibly the most important thing you can do to ensure that you have more impact is by carefully thinking about which problem you want to dedicate your time to. So let me illustrate this with another example. There was a study conducted by an interdisciplinary research team at Stanford, and what they tried to find out was how expensive it is to prolong the life of one US citizen by providing dialysis, so for people with kidney problems. And the number they came up with was $130,000. Now consider, on the other hand, the organization GiveWell that estimates that by providing bed nets in high-risk areas for malaria in African countries, you can prolong a life by 35 years for as little as $3,000 to $10,000. So that's a factor of 1,000 here. So that means that with the same resources, you can help about 1,000 people more if you decide on focusing on fighting malaria in high-risk areas, as opposed to focusing on providing dialysis in the US. So don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that people in the US are less important than people in the Global South, but you can just help so many more of them if you focus on the Global South. And I think if we're talking about a factor of 1,000, it's really our responsibility to properly think about which problem we want to tackle. And this is not a talk about global poverty where I'm trying to tell you to only focus on fighting diseases in the Global South, because there are so many more problems you could be working on, including improving the lives of animals in factory farms, or decreasing the probability of nuclear war. What's important is that all these areas of problems deserve careful analysis. So I think it's time that we take course areas and are brave enough to compare them and say that one of them is just larger in scale than the other, and that maybe to one of them we can contribute more than to the other. And if we do these calculations, or if we think about it this way, we might come up with problem areas that we would have never thought about before, and that are not the stereotypical do-gooder thing to do. Which brings me to my third point, which is do good. Don't just look good, because this is what matters. And actually, Indira Gandhi said something similar, and noticed that when you try to do good and not just look good, there's also less competition, so that's another reason to do this. And I want to illustrate what I mean by this with another completely fictional example. Imagine Kim. Kim is a well-paid lawyer, and they are taking 30% of their time off to volunteer to collect clothes for refugees, which is obviously really great and valuable. But now imagine what Kim could do instead. Kim could work full-time and use the 30% they earn more to donate to the very same organization they would be volunteering for. So now what could this organization do with this? Depending on how well paid exactly Kim is, they could hire a full-time person to do the job Kim would do on a volunteering basis. So 3 times of the work would get done. But even if they don't want to hire a person but stick to volunteers, maybe they could advertise more to find more volunteers, or they could improve their infrastructure to be better able to collect more. I'm not saying that the maths necessarily pan out in favor of doing the full-time job here. But what I want to say is that even though using 30% of your working time to volunteer for a charity clearly looks a lot better than saying, hey, I'm a full-time lawyer. And I mean, usually people also don't walk around and brag to everybody, look at how much I donate, so you really do look a little bit worse. It might still be the case that being a full-time lawyer is the thing that does more good in this case. So what I haven't talked about at all so far in how you should choose an impactful career is you. So my lesson number 4 is explore what you could be passionate about. because it's obviously extremely important that you're good at what you do and that you enjoy it. And more importantly, you won't figure out what you're good at and what you enjoy by just sitting down and thinking really hard, even though I know that that's the favorite thing to do after you graduate. And you're like, what should I study? What's my gut feeling towards chemistry? But yeah. So we at my, so I have a group and we do workshops for impactful careers. And I remember when we were trying to ask people, or to win people over to come to our workshops, there was one person who slowed down for maybe 2 seconds and to tell us how great we were, but how they wouldn't attend because they were really more of a researcher type. And such as a researcher, they couldn't come to our high impact careers workshop. And we were all standing there and screaming internally because while it's everybody's right to just like continue walking, I think replies like these just show how much of a narrow picture we have of doing good. So I can just imagine what this person was thinking. I can just imagine that this person was thinking, okay, this is some organization at a university talking about doing good, probably talking about some NGO work, probably in some African country, or maybe in some Asian country. But even if you already carefully analyzed what you think is most important and ended up with 1 or 2 problems we really want to focus on, there are so many different roles and so much expertise in any of these areas that is needed. So I just mentioned the point, money and donation. So that's, I think, the most flexible thing you can do. No matter what you're most interested in, unless the people working on the problem you're focused on are swimming in money, you can always just work a job and donate some of the money and contribute that way. But you could also work on policy or in government and advocate for implementing changes that are shown to be impactful. Or you could be the very researcher that shows which changes would be impactful. Or if you're more technically minded and you care about animals, why don't you figure out how we can replace meat? And I think even if you go the most obvious route and start working directly for an effective NGO, they will have a lot of roles that might not be obvious to you. And sometimes because these roles are not obvious to you, they will also be the ones where they desperately need people, because it's not the thing that people that are interested in doing good maybe would take or would think of and then pursue such a career. So I'm thinking of things like IT security or web design or law for some effective NGO. I'm not saying that these 3 areas have to be particularly impactful, just saying that when you find something that you want to work on, spend some time figuring out if there's some urgent need for a skill that you might be good at that's not immediately obvious. So I just talked about how there's many different roles that you can really take in any area, but what's more than this, people can be passionate for a surprising large amount of things. So don't narrow down what you think a good role for you could be too early. So one telling example for this is Steve Jobs. A lot of you probably already know this anecdote, but I'm going to tell it anyway. Steve Jobs initially wanted to become a Zen Buddhist because he was really passionate about Zen Buddhism. And we all know how this turned out. But the reason why he got into tech initially was because he needed a side hustle for quick cash to be able to spend the rest of his life as a Buddhist or to get by. I don't really know the correct motivation here. But importantly, Steve Jobs probably didn't expect to spend his entire life in his side hustle afterwards. So go and explore different roles, go and explore different problem areas. And when I say explore, I don't mean sit down and think about them really hard. I mean actually go and do things to test if you would like them. You can start with cheap things like reading about them on the internet, talking to people who are working in the roles that you might want to pursue. And you can get a bit creative and proactive when considering what to do. If you're interested into policy and you can afford it, why don't you just go and travel to Brussels for 1 or 2 days? Or another nearby policy hub, wherever you live, and have a look at the think tank events they run there. They're open. This is definitely less of an investment than spending 3 years studying something that you might be interested in and that you were too lazy to spend a week beforehand to figure out if it's really something you would enjoy. Which also brings me to my last point, which is be strategic. because you will spend more than just the next 3 years in your career. In fact, you will probably spend more than 35 years in your career. So thinking a little bit ahead really would be good, even if you think good people don't calculate. So what I mean by this is, if you go into a job, don't just consider the direct impact you will have there, but also think about the skills you will acquire, think about the value of information you get, so that is how much you learn about what you enjoy and what you're good at. And it's not nice to say, but probably think about credentials a little bit as well. People probably are more likely to hire you if you have a degree, even if you promise them that you're able to do everything a person with a degree can do just without a degree. And also think about the valuable connections you can make with your next career step. So to summarize the lessons I just presented to you, my 5 lessons are: first, get to the bottom of what you value, because you can't do good, or you can't decide how to best do good if you don't know what you mean by good. Second, some areas of doing good are a lot more impactful than others. So let's go from making a difference to making the biggest difference. 3, do good. Don't just look good, because this is what really matters. 4th, explore what you could be passionate about, because it's really important. You won't just figure it out magically, I promise. And 5th, be strategic, because you have a really long career to come. So to go back to where this started, you are fresh out of college or out of school, and you really want to change the world for the better. And you also just happen to have just listened to this TEDx talk, or you listened to half of it, and you thought it was a little bit convincing, but what do you actually do now? So the first thing you could do is just go into the internet. There's a lot of resources on how to actually go through decisions step by step. For example, there's this website, 80,000 Hours, which has advice and tools for precisely the question of how to make career decisions to have an impactful career. Or you can just sit down with some friends or other people to discuss your career aspirations and whether or not they actually make sense. But most importantly, don't fall prey to all or nothing thinking. Start planning now. Start planning in smaller steps. And actually just found out yesterday night while I was preparing the last minute that Indira Gandhi also said something like this. So let's start taking her advice to heart and treat impactful careers with the careful analysis they deserve.